We all know the Hat Man, a silhouette as thin as midnight, his hat brim razor straight, standing perfectly still beside the bed. He never lunges, he never speaks. He simply waits. Ask 10 strangers online about their worst sleep paralysis story, and you'll hear the same outline. The same brimmed shadow, the same electric dread, even when those strangers share no language, no culture, no subreddit. While shadowy night visitors stretch back through human history, a handful of sleep paralysis case notes in medical journals like the Journal of the Neurological Sciences mention a man in a broad-brimmed hat looming over patients as far back as 1978. Something in the dark opens a door we can all see, but the Hat Man is just the newest guest in humanity's shared haunted house. Long before he stole our breath at 3 a.m., another figure filled the doorway. Older, louder, coiled in smoke and thunder. A monster so universal it broke the rule that myths stay local. Dragons. It sounds absurd, even laughable, to compare dragons and the Hat Man. One is a faceless sleep demon. The other is a fire-breathing lizard with hoarder issues. But sit with this for a second. Every major civilization on Earth came up with a dragon. They turn up everywhere. China's river valleys, Norway's fjords, Mesoamerica's jungle temples, Australia's red interior. There was no internet, and no way for these civilizations to share such specific ideas. Yet across oceans, every civilization on Earth inked the same impossible creature. How? Let's circle the planet the way early map makers drew coastlines, slowly, with wonder, filling gaps as we go. East Asia first, where dragons never needed wings. In ancient China, dragons were believed to live in rivers, lakes, and clouds. They were symbols of rainfall and agricultural prosperity, essential forces in a civilization built around the rhythms of the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers. These dragons weren't seen as monsters, they were protectors, spiritual custodians of water, weather, and cosmic balance. The Chinese called them long. They were depicted with the antlers of deer, the claws of eagles, the scales of carp, and the whiskers of a catfish, an intentional fusion of respected creatures. Unlike Western dragons, they didn't hoard treasure or burn villages. They summoned storms, controlled the tides, and marked the turning of seasons. By the Han Dynasty, emperors began associating themselves directly with dragons, especially the 5-clawed variety, which became an imperial symbol. The idea was simple. Just as dragons ruled the skies, the emperor ruled the land. Wearing a dragon robe wasn't just a display of power, it was a divine endorsement. Even today, remnants of that reverence survive. Dragon dances performed during Lunar New Year aren't just tradition. They're reenactments of a force once thought to bring life or ruin, depending on its mood. In Korea, dragons held similar traits, but with some distinct differences. Known as Yong or Mireo, these dragons were generally benevolent and closely tied to agriculture. They were often believed to dwell in bodies of water, and were thought to be guardians of specific villages, mountains, or rivers. Korean legends describe them as protectors, creatures who brought rain during droughts and ensured good harvests. Unlike their Chinese counterparts, Korean dragons were sometimes portrayed with longer beards and without wings, emphasizing their grounded role in the natural world rather than the heavens. In Japan, dragons, called Ryu, were deeply influenced by both Chinese and indigenous beliefs. Like Chinese dragons, they were associated with water, rain, and wisdom. But in Japanese folklore, dragons often appeared as shapeshifters or spirits that could interact more directly with humans. Some stories describe dragons falling in love with humans or guarding sacred treasures. Others place them in shrines as divine beings, worshipped for protection. The most famous example, Ryujin, was said to live under the sea and control the tides with magical jewels. Japanese dragons typically had 3 claws, distinguishing them from the 5-clawed Chinese imperial dragon and the 4-clawed Korean version. In Vietnam, dragons, called Rong, were national symbols as well. Vietnamese mythology tells of Lac Long Quan, a dragon lord who married a fairy and fathered the Vietnamese people. Here too, dragons were linked to rain, agriculture, and kingship. They appeared in art, architecture, and royal regalia, usually stylized with flowing bodies and cloud-like motifs. To this day, the Vietnamese dragon remains a symbol of strength, nobility, and divine ancestry. Southeast Asia also contains echoes of this shared dragon archetype. In the Philippines, the Bakunawa is a sea serpent that attempts to swallow the moon, an explanation for lunar eclipses. According to Visayan mythology, this dragon-like creature lived in the ocean and was once a beautiful goddess transformed out of jealousy or rage. Filipino legends describe warriors playing gongs and drums to scare it away during an eclipse, believing the sound could drive it back into the sea. In South Asia, dragons blur into a larger family of serpentine deities. In Hindu mythology, Nagas are serpent beings who live in rivers, underground realms, or celestial lakes. They are sometimes divine, sometimes dangerous. They guard treasures, offer wisdom, and play key roles in epic texts like the Mahabharata. In Buddhist cosmology, Nagas often protect sacred texts and relics. One legend describes a Naga sheltering the Buddha from a storm by spreading its hood over him like an umbrella. The Indian concept of Vritra, a monstrous serpent or dragon, predates many others. In the Rigveda, Vritra held back the waters of the world until the god Indra slew him with a thunderbolt. This myth, which symbolizes the release of life-giving rain, is one of the oldest recorded dragon-slaying stories, dating back over 3,000 years. In the Middle East, dragons were more often symbols of chaos. In ancient Mesopotamia, the goddess Tiamat was depicted as a monstrous sea serpent or dragon. She represented primordial chaos, raw, undivided creation. According to Babylonian myth, she gave birth to the gods, only to be slain by Marduk, who used her body to build the heavens and the earth. Tiamat wasn't evil in the modern sense. She was the necessary wildness that existed before order. Further west, Leviathan emerges from Hebrew texts as a sea monster created by God. Sometimes as a symbol of divine power, sometimes as an enemy to be overcome. It appears in the Book of Job, writhing in the deep, fire-breathing, and untamable. Europe took a different path. Dragons there were shaped not just by myth, but by theology. In Greece, the Hydra guarded sacred swamps, its many heads regenerating whenever severed. In Norse mythology, Nidhogger chewed on the roots of the world tree. But it's during the medieval period that dragons take on a particularly moral dimension. They become enemies of saints and knights, symbols of sin, greed, and chaos. The dragon-slaying motif wasn't just exciting storytelling, it was allegory. When St. George thrust his spear into the dragon, he wasn't just saving a town, he was destroying paganism, temptation, or evil itself. This view of dragons as monsters to be overcome spread through Europe alongside Christianity, shaping how Western culture would depict them for centuries. In both North and South America, dragons, or something very close to them, appear in forms tied to water, land, and reverence. Among many indigenous peoples of North America, stories describe great horned serpents. The Cherokee called it Uktena, a massive creature with a shining scale on its forehead and horns like a deer. It was said to live in deep rivers and caves, guarding sacred places and punishing the unworthy. Other tribes told of similar beings, guardians of water, bringers of storms, and sometimes messengers from the spirit world. In South America, the Inca spoke of Amaru, a two-headed serpent with feathers and wings. One head looked to the sky, the other to the earth. It was believed to move between worlds, connecting the heavens with the underworld. Amaru was often carved into temples and woven into textiles, its image representing duality, transformation, and cosmic balance. And then there's Quetzalcoatl. Among the Aztecs, he was not a beast, but a god. A feathered serpent who brought maize, taught astronomy, and represented the morning star. He was a creator deity, a civilizer. According to myth, Quetzalcoatl descended into the underworld to gather the bones of humanity and bring them back to life. His name means precious serpent, and his legacy stretched across Mesoamerica, from the Toltecs to the Maya. Lastly, the rainbow serpent is one of the most sacred and enduring figures in Australian Aboriginal mythology. Said to have carved out the land during the Dreamtime, this powerful being slithered across the earth, shaping rivers, mountains, and valleys. It represents both creation and destruction, bringing life-giving rain, but also capable of unleashing floods if disrespected. Often seen as the embodiment of a rainbow arching across the sky, the serpent is closely tied to water, fertility, and the cyclical nature of life. Its gender varies by region, but its role as a guardian of the land and sacred law is universal across Aboriginal traditions. Across thousands of miles and hundreds of cultures, people imagined the same impossible thing: a scaled, powerful being that lives at the edges of the map. So why do dragons appear across so many cultures, and why do they look so similar? There are several theories. The first is based on fossils. Throughout history, ancient peoples uncovered bones they couldn't explain. They didn't have paleontology, museums, or scientific frameworks, so when a skull larger than a man's torso was unearthed, or massive teeth turned up in farmland, it made sense to connect them to creatures of legend. In China, it's believed that dinosaur fossils, especially those of stegosaurs and ceratopsians, may have influenced early depictions of dragons. These fossils often turned up in river valleys and mountainous regions, exactly where dragons were said to live. In ancient Greece, the large skulls of extinct mammoths were misinterpreted as the remains of one-eyed giants, giving rise to the Cyclops myth. Similar misunderstandings likely contributed to the creation of dragon lore across cultures. The world was full of bones, and the human mind just filled in the rest. Another theory centers on pattern recognition, specifically our tendency to merge familiar dangers into composite forms. Snakes, birds, and large predators all posed threats to early humans. Dragons combine traits from all three. From a cognitive standpoint, this makes them an efficient mental construct. They're instantly recognizable as dangerous, even if they don't exist. Psychologist Carl Jung called these recurring images archetypes, symbols hardwired into the human psyche that reappear across time and culture. In that framework, the dragon functions as a universal archetype for fear, transformation, and the unknown. There's also a neurological element. Studies have shown that infants react more strongly to images of snakes than to flowers or harmless animals. Evolution may have primed our brains to quickly register certain shapes, like scales, eyes, and fangs, as threatening. Add wings or elemental power, and you create a kind of super stimulus, an exaggerated version of natural fear triggers. This may explain why dragons show up in so many teaching stories, myths, and rituals. In Europe, dragons punished the prideful and tested heroes. In China, they blessed emperors and brought rain. In Mesoamerica, they created calendars and carried the stars. The core idea remained, a powerful, serpentine force, but the purpose shifted. Dragons continued evolving into the modern era. In 1974, Dungeons & Dragons introduced color-coded dragons. In 1985, arcade games like Dragon's Lair featured dragons as visual centerpieces to draw players in. In 2001, Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away gave audiences Haku, a river spirit in dragon form, linking dragons back to their origins as nature spirits tied to identity and memory. Across media, the dragon has proven unusually resilient. Its form can change, but its presence remains. It appears in children's books, national symbols, tattoos, aircraft nose art, and even cybersecurity tools. Why do we keep imagining dragons with beauty, iridescent scales, rainbow-colored wings, golden horns? Why do we make our fears majestic? One theory is that it's a form of psychological rehearsal, a way to mentally prepare for danger. We can't fight floods, storms, or time, but we can picture ourselves slaying a dragon. It's a stand-in for existential threats, made manageable. Another theory is that dragons serve as a reminder of humility. They represent forces beyond our control. And then there's the possibility that dragons are a kind of ancestral memory, not of real reptiles, but of apex predators from prehistory, whose shapes and movements embedded themselves into oral tradition. We might be biologically and culturally wired to recognize that shape. Whatever the origin, whether bones, brains, or belief, the pattern holds. Scroll through modern streaming platforms. Dragons are everywhere. Open a fantasy novel, there they are again. Boot up a mobile game, and dragons appear as avatars, collectibles, and bosses. They survive because they're flexible. They can carry meaning, narrative, emotion, or ideology. In that sense, they share territory with the Hat Man, a modern shadow entity said to appear during sleep paralysis. Both dragons and the Hat Man inhabit spaces science struggles to quantify. Both appear without explanation, across cultures, in oddly consistent forms, and both seem to reflect something about us. The Hat Man is paralyzing. He appears when you cannot move. The dragon, by contrast, is mobilizing. It invites action, a quest, a confrontation, which brings us back to the modern world. If you wake in the night and feel a weight on your chest, and in the corner there's a silhouette in a hat, you're not alone. But that figure is relatively new to human imagination. Long before modern shadow men, humans were already dreaming of something larger. Something with scales, with wings, with a voice that could shake the earth or summon rain. Something that stood at the boundary between fear and story. The Hat Man might haunt the margins, but dragons have lived at the center, and whether we fear them, worship them, or turn them into mascots, they remain one of the clearest mirrors of how we process the unknown. From bone to symbol, from threat to meaning, from storm to story, the dragon is still here, because we never really stopped needing it.